Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Wendy, did you bring the presents? Yes, Mason. They're all stacked in your car. What about the tree? Our boys went in this morning, and at lunchtime the boys left to put it up. Mason looked at his watch. He had calculated everything correctly. Today from morning the whole orphanage, headed by the director, was entertained. The youngest ones were first at the theater, then at the children's playroom, and the older ones were skiing at one of the campgrounds that Mason owned. As soon as the children left, work boiled over at the orphanage. The Christmas tree was brought in and set up. The girls have to decorate the assembly hall, dress up the Christmas tree. In the evening after their return, the children will have dinner and go to bed, but in the morning there will be a feast. Mason grinned. Probably it should be considered lucky that they have a small orphanage in their town, only 50 kids. If there were 200 kids, he wouldn't be able to give them such a party. The phone vibrated in his pocket, and Mason picked it up without looking. Mason, what is all this? He wrinkled his nose and moved the phone away from his ear a little. Lisa, what's the matter again? What's got you so upset? Lisa was his fiancée, or rather, Lisa thought she was his fiancée. He kept quiet, didn't say yes or no, just observed, just realized that he was already 27 and it was probably time to get married, but probably not for sure. Yes, he appreciated her for coming to follow him from the capital, but only at first, because then he realized that Lisa was sure of his return. She said more and more often, "Isn't it time to make peace with your father so that he can bring you back from exile?" "Lisa, what makes you think your father and I had a fight?" "I like it here." "I don't want to go back." "Of course, you're going to live here all your life, aren't you?" "Actually, that's exactly what I intend to do." Lisa looked at him, smiling, and showed him that she didn't believe him at all. He didn't. In general, Lisa seemed to him a doll, and the more they were together, the more he became convinced that she had no brains, and that her brains were made up of money signs. She was the daughter of a rather large businessman. Mason had met her at the birthday party of one of the Shins of the Golden Youth. As much as he did not like such parties, but sometimes had to still go out in the light, Lisa at once, you could say, hung on him. Mason did not take any active actions, because Lisa took everything on herself the same evening. They slept together in her one-room apartment. Lisa was beautiful, perhaps too beautiful, and even then he had thought her looks were reminiscent of a Barbie doll, but had found it rather interesting. Now emphasizing the resemblance to a doll was causing him a very different emotion. What upset me? It upset me that my fiancé is an idiot. Mason grimaced. He hated it when people stepped out of line, even if it was the people he lived next to. And yet, "Mason, why are you playing the fool? I've been telling you for a week that I want to throw a great party, and you've been pussyfooting around like it's your last dime. And today, I find out you're throwing another party for those punk kids. I don't think it's any of your business for one. You want a party, have a party, but not in my house and not on my dime." That's two. And third, and most importantly, "Lisa, I think it's time for you to come home." She even choked with indignation. "Home? Oh, so that's it. So you used me and now you don't need me anymore. Did I ever tell you I needed you? It was only your wish to come here. You didn't even ask me if I needed you. You just came and moved into my house." Lisa hung up, and Mason sighed. Why did it have to be like this? He'd come back to this town because he'd once had to spend 2 years in this very orphanage. The memories were hard. If it wasn't for the principal and the tutors, it was unlikely he would ever have the chance to go home to his father. Mason sat up. His legs grew heavy and the hammers rattled in his head. It always did when he thought back to that time. Mason's father had been one of the first to catch the right jet stream during the lean years. Literally in a year, he turned from an ordinary engineer into a real owner of factories, newspapers, steamships. Along with wealth came problems in the form of competitors. Christopher realized that the competitors are capable of much, but to get a grip on life, he was very insistently asked to give up the lemonade factory. Someone needed it to produce Pal, a very popular drink at the time. But Christopher didn't like to back down when there was no good reason to do so. They started making threatening phone calls to his wife. She was terribly worried, not so much for herself as for her son, but her husband convinced her that it was all just psychological pressure. She had always believed her husband. They were attacked while Slava and Mason were walking in the park. Slava fought to the last for her son. I guess she didn't mean to get hurt. It just happened. It turned out that in order to take the child away from the mother, she had to be sent to the other world. Christopher found out almost immediately, not even 15 minutes later. All his people rushed to look for those who could take his son away, and he himself rushed to the hospital where his wife was taken, but he only managed to hear, "Christopher, save him!" Clara closed her eyes, and Christopher put a barrel to the doctor's head. At that time, few businessmen did not have such a toy. "Save her! Save her!" The doctor turned pale, but he didn't take his eyes away. "She's gone. There's nothing we can do." For another minute, Christopher stared at him, then lowered the trunk, and himself knelt beside the pastel of his Clara. The search for Mason had been going on for over 3 months. A very active search. Then, of course, they'd been going on too, but not at such a rapid pace. The investigator averted his eyes. Christopher himself, of course, realized that with each passing day, the hope of finding Mason alive was diminishing. Mason was brought to some kind of children's hospital. The boy almost did not speak, looked at everyone with hunted eyes. All his body was covered with bruises. He did not remember anything from the word at all. Apparently, his brain had put up such a block, either from what happened in front of his eyes with his mother, or for some other reason. And apparently there were plenty of them. Mason remembered how scary it was for him, even though he was only 5 years old, but the horror in his soul was inhuman. And it was even scarier because he remembered nothing at all. Some blackness in his head. Then he was transferred to an orphanage in this small town, which was 600 kilometers away from his native home. He was alone, small, almost family, where the educators worked hard. It took them 2 years before Mason began to die off. He remembers that time, waking up, eating breakfast, and sitting by the window. Mason was waiting, only he didn't know what, but he knew he just had to wait. One day it was Christmas. Something happened that somehow shook Mason's mind. A Christmas tree was brought to the orphanage, not very thick, a little crooked, but a real one. The teachers brought some toys from home, made garlands with the children, and one day all the children began to decorate it. Mason took a toy too. It was a small ball with tinfoil stars inside. He raised his hand and froze. It was the kind of balloons his mom loved. She always said there were snowflakes inside. Mom was gone. Mason realized it clearly now, and Daddy was gone too, because Mason had lost him. He dropped the balloon, which shattered loudly, and covered his face with his hands. The kindergarten teacher rushed over to him. She saw how the boy turned pale, how his hands shook. "Mason, what happened?" He looked at her with frantic eyes and repeated, My mom was ruined." Mason was then urgently taken to their doctor, Vanessa. He talked for a long time, with his eyes closed, telling Vanessa everything that came into his head. After an hour, she was forced to give Mason a sedative injection. When the boy fell asleep, Vanessa went to the principal's office. "We need to see a 2-year-old summary of New York City. I understand that Mason's dad is a rich man and his mom died in front of him when they tried to take the boy away. I'm sure we'll find something. But it's so far away." "I understand." A few hours later, the woman had Christopher's cell phone number in her hand. It was Jenna who called him. "Christopher?" "Yes, you have a call from the orphanage." The voice she heard on the phone was metallic, and Jenna was even a little confused. She was not so long ago the director and did not quite know how to put herself in the right way. "What orphanage?" She began to quickly tell the story of Mason. The man interrupted her. "Had the police been notified now?" "Not yet. We thought we'd talk to you first." "Don't report it. I'm on my way." Jenna hung up the phone and looked at Vanessa confused. "Whoa, what is it?" "He said he was on his way and that the police hadn't been notified yet." "Why not?" "I don't know." "What if it's not him?" "It's one of the ones, Ho." Vanessa stopped being scared, but a couple hours later, they did call the police. Christopher's senses were very heightened after everything that had happened. As soon as the woman's voice said that they were calling from the orphanage, his heart sank. He could not have listened further because he was sure Mason had been found, but then another thought came into his head, and if the police of that city had hidden the fact of finding a similar child, and the photos of the boy had been sent all over the country, then perhaps it was not so simple. Perhaps the people who took Mason away are connected to or paid off by the men in shoulder straps. The fact that Mason was found is very good, but also dangerous for the boy. Christopher has driven the driver up several times. "John, I'm asking you to step on the gas." John sighed. "Christopher, you know I am a good driver. On these roads, 130 kilometers per hour is the limit, I assure you. There's no telling what will happen to the cars after this race." "John, to hell with the cars. Let's buy new ones." "Yes, new cars. Will you buy yourself?" "Trust me, it's more dangerous." Christopher sighed. He knew John well, realized that he was telling the truth because the road really left much to be desired. A security car was following them literally 5 meters away, and Christopher had brought them with him precisely because he had too many questions. The cops arrived after another 2 o'clock. Jenna was very surprised when one of them said that they should take the boy with them. "That's out of the question. We're in charge of him, and until we have the proper orders, he is not getting out of here." One of the men who had arrived gave her an unkind look. "I don't understand now. Are you challenging the orders of the police?" Jenna looked at him confusedly, then said, "Show me your ID. I'll call your superiors." The other suddenly pinned the principal against the wall. "Get the boy over here quickly." Vanessa rushed to help the supervisor, but she was immediately shoved aside. She would have fallen if someone hadn't picked her up. The people who identified themselves as police officers were already lying on the floor, pinned down by tough guys. In front of Jenna stood a man. "I told you not to call the police, but I thought I had to. What if you're the one who massacred the boy's mom?" Christopher twitched. "Does Mason know the mom's gone?" "Yes, he remembered everything yesterday, and I told you before that. Where is he now?" Christopher felt that he had to see his son urgently had to hug him. Otherwise he would go crazy. "He's asleep." The boy had to be sedated. Christopher did not have time to ask anything else. There was a shrill scream in the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy." The man turned slowly and saw Mason. He came out of some door and looked at Christopher with tear-filled eyes. "Son?" Christopher walked down the hall, and Mason ran toward him. He grabbed his son. pulled him against him. Mason, my son. They were never apart again. Mason had to recover for a long time. For a long time he screamed at night, woke up from nightmares, but his father was always near. He took his son to the sea, taught him to ski. They spent a lot of time together. School began, and the child's thoughts shifted a little, and when he was already in the 2nd grade, he turned to his father. "Dad, can you talk to me?" Christopher tore himself away from his papers. "Sure, is something wrong?" Mason sat down next to him. "You know, Dad, it's Christmas soon, and it was supposed to be Christmas at the orphanage when you found me. There were no presents there, or rather, we glued something ourselves and put it under the tree for others, but all the kids expect that the gift is the parents. I got such a gift, and they got nothing. Maybe we could go there. I looked, I have lots of toys, and we would definitely get enough for everyone." Christopher looked at his son carefully. "Are you ready to part with your toys and give them to those kids?" "Yes, Dad. Jenna is very nice, and everyone is nice, but there are no toys there at all old, broken." Christopher cradled his son in his arms. "Sure, Mason will go. You don't have to take your toys. I'll buy them." Mason pulled away. "Dad, but it's expensive." "Not more expensive than money, son." Mason hugged him with both arms. "You're the best dad." His father grumbled annoyingly, his eyes watering for some reason. When they got to the orphanage, Mason froze. He looked at everything carefully, and Christopher couldn't understand what his son was thinking. Jenna came outside. She looked in surprise at the big car, more like a bus. When Christopher came out from behind the wheel, the woman smiled confusedly. "Is that you? Is there something wrong with Mason?" Mason quickly jumped out and rushed to her and hugged her, and she hugged him back, even crying. "Mason, you've grown so much. I can't even recognize you. You know, Jenna, I'm getting straight A's in school." Christopher smiled. "What about the B's in behavior?" Mason waved him off. "Daddy, it's not studying. It's just behavior, and I'll get better, that's for sure." Jenna laughed. "Of course you will. In fact, I'll tell you in confidence that a B in behavior is a very good grade." She straightened up and looked at Christopher. "Then I don't understand at all. You're just visiting us? Well, you could say that Mason missed you. Come on in, we'd all be happy to. Mason, you remember Emily, don't you? She used to follow you around all the time." "I remember. Did they take her away?" "Not yet, but you're just in time. She has an aunt, and after Christmas, Emily will go to her family." Mason smiled. She was looking forward to it. "Oh, Liam, remember? The one who fought all the time?" "Yeah. We put him in a club, and the coach says he's going to be a good athlete." "That's great." Mason was smiling, and so was Christopher. His son so rarely smiled. "Jenna, we're not here empty-handed here. Is there someone to unload? Will you help?" He pushed the door, and in the view of the astonished teacher appeared the car interior, densely packed with boxes and bags. "What's this?" She came closer, took one of the boxes. A car, took another, a board game. "What's this?" "Are these toys for Christmas?" "Well, it's not just toys and books and some clothes. It's Christmas." Christopher smiled embarrassedly. As it turns out, it's not so easy to give gifts completely and selfishly. It only seems to be the right thing to do, but when he looked into Jenna's eyes, he drowned there. They were grateful, surprised, moist, glistening. He could go on endlessly with words to describe her eyes, but she looked away. Christopher had time to think. After all, she's just over 30 and already a principal. They decided to unload the presents, not immediately, but after the children had gone to bed so that they wouldn't see them. Everyone helped, the teachers, nannies, even the watchman and Grandfather Sebastian. Jenna rejoiced like a child. How many dolls? We have more girls, and there are almost no decent dolls left, so they sit in line to play. Christopher realized this was true, and it made him feel so bad. Why do children have to sit in line to play with some old doll? The next day, Christopher saw the boy's eyes light up. He'd never been much of a sentimentalist, but here, he decided that he would come here with Mason every Christmas. That's what they did, and they were welcomed, as Christopher himself said, as much as he'd ever been welcomed. When Mason turned 20, his dad started to slowly bring him into his company. And it had to be said, Mason was doing just fine. Christopher was smiling. You know, son, you're gonna be good. I know and I can see it. Mason turned 23, and his father started talking about expanding. You know, Mason, I think the two of us together, we could make it big. As long as I'm on the clock, we can do a lot of things. Dad, what are you doing? You're not going to make yourself an old man, are you? Well, no, not right now, but believe me, that time will come very quickly, so much so that I won't even know it. Come on, you'll always be young. And as for expansion, I have an idea. I've been doing some research on where there are fewer people like us, and I know what I want to suggest. Christopher sat down next to his son, who was spreading out papers on the table. Well, show me. I see you've done a lot of preparation. Yeah, I had to sit for a while. I even thought that those who've been in business before are the real heroes. Why is that? Because there was no internet, and you had to wait weeks for every answer or travel, and you couldn't gather information that fast anyway. Christopher smiled. That's where you're right. Everything is too fast now, no fun. They sat up late into the night, and when they were done, his father looked at Mason. You're good. If you find a suitable room, go ahead. Of course I'll help you, but that land will be yours. We'll make a branch, and it's all in your hands. You want me to be the branch manager. Well, Dad, I don't have much experience, do I? I didn't have any when I started, and I was almost as old as you are now. So, son, go ahead. The town greeted Mason with beautiful spring weather. He was glad to get out of the car and stretch. It felt good. Yes, it did feel good. The leaves were just opening and apparently smelled of something, some kind of freshness or something. And the breeze, almost imperceptible, but so pleasant, carried the smell to everyone. Mason smiled. Apparently, it smells like spring. He didn't remember what it was like here in spring, or he didn't go for walks in the orphanage, or he did, but he forgot, and he and his father used to come here only in winter, always under Christmas. By the way, Mason made a wish that this Christmas he himself would come to the orphanage with presents, or rather, that he would earn them himself. His father had always been in the grocery business, but Mason decided to expand and open not only stores with their products, but also to try himself in the restaurant business. It was something he had always wanted to do. Dad thought about it for a while and said, "Well, I cannot forbid you, especially since I find the idea very interesting." And here's Mason here. In the car, a few business plans, over which he sat for a long time. Now it is necessary to rent a place, and everything else later. He didn't want to go to a hotel. He understood very well what kind of service there was. Mason got into the car, dialed Jenna's number. "Good afternoon." "Mason, hello. It's so good to hear from you. Jenna, I'm not far from the orphanage. Is it okay if I stop by for coffee?" "Mason, but why do you ask?" "Sure, come on over. Did something happen to you?" "No, I'm fine." "All right. Well, come on over." Mason parked the car, went to the candy store, bought a cake. "Hello, Mason." Jenna rushed over to hug him. "How are you visiting us and not on Christmas Day?" she asked, while she quickly set the table. "I knew it. I bought your favorite pies on the way here today. I'm here on business. We want to open a branch here." Jenna sat down and thought about it. "I don't know what to say to that. I think it's very good. There's not much work in our city. Young people have no place to go. Why here? There are bigger cities nearby. The thing is, this town's in the middle. It's convenient to all those towns." "You're right. I never really thought about it. Dad said the same thing." Jenna suddenly flared up as if she were in her early 20s instead of her 50s. "How's Christopher?" "He's fine. He sends his love. Him too." Jenna was silent, staring out the window, and Mason thought he never knew if she was married or not. "Jenna, I wish I had an apartment, someone to iron and cook for, 'cause I don't have any time at all." "Sure, I'll pay you very well." "Wait a minute, let me think about it." For a while, Jenna sat in silence, tapping her pen on the table. "I think I can help you. We used to have an elderly woman working as a janitor. It got hard, so she left. Very clean, quiet, worked because she had a big apartment and the utilities ate up all her payments. I'll look up her number." 10 minutes later, Jenna called. "Good afternoon, Miranda. Did you recognize her? How's your health? How are you?" She listened for a while, nodding, then spoke again. "Miranda, I seem to recall you have a large apartment. I have an acquaintance coming into town, looking for a place to rent with someone to look after him." She laughed. "No, of course he's an adult. It's just that he has a lot of work to do, and you have to eat. You have to wear clean shirts." Yeah, okay. "Well, I'll give him your address. He'll be right over." She hung up. "Well, I think you're going to like Miranda." Mason stood up. "Thank you, Jenna. You've been a great help to me then and now. Come on, Mason. You do so much for us, for our orphanage." He had already reached the door, and then he turned around. "Say, I never knew. Are you married? Do you have children?" Jenna looked at him carefully, then sighed. "No. First I studied, then I went to work. My heart ached for my children. My beau considered me for crazy and ran away. I couldn't dry my tears for the first few years. Here at work, I kept to myself so that the children wouldn't see me. And when I went out, I cried immediately. So many broken fates, such terrible stories. I kept thinking later, and then I looked back, and that's it. The train has left, but I'm not upset. Men, it's not so important. It's the children that matter. These little people who have already received a portion of betrayal at that age." Mason saw how hard it was for her to say the words. He knew exactly what she meant. Watching Jenna, she's always like a hen with the kids, and they're all clinging to her. Even if there is noise, it is enough for her just to say something softly, and everyone is silent and listens to her. They say such a teacher from God. You are the best woman and kinder than you I certainly have not met. On impulse, Mason reached back and hugged Jenna. She immediately pulled out a handkerchief, sniffled. "Oh, come on, get out of here. Miranda's probably waiting in there." Mason left the office and headed for the car. I wondered if his father had noticed how the principal was reacting to him. He immediately pulled out his cell phone. "Dad, hi. I made it, of course you did. Just got off the phone with Jenna." And it seemed to him or his father's voice trembled. Mason talked to him a little longer and disconnected, and stopped at the car. I may be a fool, but it seems my father is even more foolish. He pulled into the yard of an old house. Not old. It was obvious that the house was being watched, but exactly old, even the stucco over the porches and under the windows. Wow! Is this a real monument? I haven't lived in a monument yet. Apparently, Mason was looking around too obviously, so he even got the attention of some old lady. Do you like it? He turned around, and there was a little old woman standing next to him, her eyes quite young, mischievous, and like a dried mushroom. Very much. I wonder how old this house is? And you open your eyes wider, and you will see the date of construction. The old woman smiled, flashing her teeth. Mason was not even surprised at her teeth when he saw what she was talking about. He laughed at once. Not noticing the 2-meter-high letters on the wall was an effort. Wow, he's over 100 years old. But he didn't, he did. Tell me, Grandma, how do I find Miranda? I'm not even 80 yet. I'll be 80 next year. And Miranda, I've been waiting for you for half an hour. I don't know what road you took. You can drive around the city in 15 minutes. He laughed again. He liked Miranda very much. Please forgive me. It's so beautiful that I was delayed. I'm often in the city, but I've never been in the spring. The woman softened. Yes, our town is beautiful. You are right, and the fact that you often come here, I know. I recognized you. You and your dad came here when I was on shift. I know why you come. Mason didn't say anything. The old woman didn't need an answer. She stood in front of him in the driveway. Don't think. My house is clean and nice. I do a lot of things myself, but my granddaughter scolds me and tells me to wait for her. Mason could barely keep up with the old lady. You have a granddaughter too? I do. I'm normal. Why shouldn't I have a granddaughter? Does she live with you? No, she's independent. She's 20 years old, and she's working, helping my old lady. He sighed with relief. So no one will be in the way. You can work and rest in peace. Not that Mason was so against everyone, but he realized that there would be a lot of work. When they entered the apartment, he looked around with interest. Time seemed to have stopped in this apartment a long time ago, maybe back in the post-war years. The antique furniture, the paintings on the walls, how old were they? He wouldn't be surprised if the paintings were more expensive than this apartment. But come on, I got 4 rooms. 1 big one and 3 smaller ones. 1 is my bedroom and 2 are empty. This one's bigger and brighter. I think you'll be comfortable in it. It really was a cozy room. A big bed, also from some prehistoric time, sturdy, solid, and the closet was huge. Mason even thought that if they ever wanted to take it out, it would take more than 2 movers. The desk, he even leaned over. It was. Instead of legs, the table has tiger paws. Yes, it's interesting here. The old woman grinned. What's interesting? Just old stuff. It was obvious that she said she didn't mean it. She loved her home. Let's go on. He followed her again. Here's the bathroom, the toilet, and here's the kitchen. By the way, you write me a schedule of when and what to feed you. Just buy food, because I mostly eat porridge and potatoes. Mason nodded with a smile. He wondered what the old woman had worked as before. It seemed to him that she had been a supervisor or a foreman of some kind. Mason didn't know why a foreman. That's just the way it seemed to him. He brought the stuff out of the car, laid it out, pulled out his laptop. We need to see what cafes and restaurants are already here, then go and see what they feed. About a couple hours later, Miranda knocked on the door. Mason, you still haven't texted me anything about the food. Let's get off work and go have tea and figure this out. He pushed his laptop away. Miranda was right. We should do things in order. They drank delicious tea with some unbelievably delicious scones and talked. Miranda, I'm an omnivore. I can be fed anything. I'll get up at various times, but no later than 8. I can heat it up myself if I need to. Don't even think about it. I'll charge him and he'll heat his own food. No. Let me leave you money for groceries and you buy what you need. I don't really like shopping. I get enough of it at work. That's good. So you don't care about cooking? Yes, absolutely. He put the money on the table. The old woman looked at it in surprise. This is for 6 months? Now Mason was surprised. Why for 6 months? For 2, 3 weeks, you name it, as more will be needed. Delicacies will have to be bought. He laughed. Miranda talked in a very interesting way. She didn't try to replace phrases or words with more streamlined ones, but most importantly, she had such lively intonations that it would have been impossible not to understand what she was saying. He heard the edge of his ear as the old woman went somewhere, then swore in the kitchen because the prices had generally gone crazy, then quietly tinkled dishes, something cooking. And then there was such a smell from the kitchen that Mason almost choked on his saliva. He couldn't sit in the room for long and went out. Miranda was sitting in front of the old TV, watching the show intently. It seemed to Mason that they had started showing this movie when he was still young. Miranda turned around. Mason, dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. Good. He sat down on the couch and looked at the screen too. The TV kept blinking. Mason, not that he didn't understand what the episode was about. His eyes even hurt. Miranda, how do you watch it? It hurts your eyes. There's no other way. I've tried listening, but it's not that interesting. And he doesn't always blink. Sometimes he blinks normally. It was as if she was sticking up for the TV. The credits were already rolling. But that's it. Let's go eat. Mason. The smells coming from the kitchen were such that Mason could hardly keep up with Miranda. As soon as they entered the kitchen, the big alarm clock rang. Miranda slammed it down. I remember. At the surprised look, Mason explained. If I put something in the oven, I always set the alarm. I don't think I've ever forgotten, but age. She said the age thing so lightly that it made Mason's heart ache. Miranda made meat with mushrooms, bell peppers, and potatoes. Mason had been to a lot of restaurants, but he'd never tasted anything this good. He leaned back on the back of the kitchen couch and said, I've never eaten anything like this. Miranda laughed. It's still a flower. When you taste my granddaughter's cooking, you'll die. Poisoned? She looked at him in surprise, then laughed. But if she does, it's delicious. Mason laughed and thought it would be interesting to see this granddaughter, who is so independent and cooks so deliciously. Such an opportunity presented itself to him in a couple of days. Only if he knew it was the same granddaughter. Mason was just turning into the yard when he saw the girl. It had been raining since morning, and the puddles were almost knee-deep. Either he saw her too late, or she was deaf and didn't hear him, but he happened to dunk her pretty good from the puddle. The girl jumped back, and he immediately stopped. Though he didn't think he was guilty, he decided to apologize. The girl turned to him, furious enough that the sparks and lightning from her eyes felt almost physical. Mason was not immediately able to speak because he was simply stunned. Excuse me, please, I didn't notice you. The girl took out her headphones. It was immediately clear to him why she hadn't heard him. Excuse me, you're out of your mind. You're racing through a yard where people and children are walking by the way. She thought about it for a while. And cats and dogs. I'm not racing, I was just driving. You saw the puddles. Why are you walking on the very edge? I'm walking on the sidewalk, you know, where I'm supposed to walk. Young lady, why are you yelling like that? I apologized. You want me to reimburse you for the dry cleaning? She even stomped. Make up for your brains. But that was too much. You're a rude girl. I hear from a boor, and from one who can't drive a car." She turned around and walked away, and Mason jumped in the car and accelerated. It happened, and this time he didn't want to. There was another puddle in front of him, and the girl was just passing in front of it. He even clenched his eyes for a second, seeing a wave of dirty water flying toward the girl, and in the rearview mirror, he could see her threatening him with her fist. Mason could barely find a place to park his car. It felt like everyone remembered they had cars in the rain. Mason's car was bulky, so he had to work hard to fit it neatly into the empty space. When he finally put the car in, the rain was already over. Somewhere in the direction of the sunset, the sun was peeking out. His mood improved a little. "What's the big deal?" she yelled at her husband at home. Mason thought all this, and before his eyes stood those eyes that threw sparks. He smiled a little. Yes, it would not be boring at home with such a one. He quickly walked up the steps and opened the door. Miranda immediately gave him the keys. "You're young. You're not likely to be back late, so I can't have an old woman running around to open the door for you." Someone was talking in the kitchen. He looked in to say hello and was stunned. Those very eyes were looking at him. So Grandma, and now this boorish monster is standing in his kitchen, looking at me like he's seen a ghost. "Don't tell me that's your tenant." Miranda turned around in surprise, looked at Mason, and suddenly laughed. "I was wondering how I could introduce you to, and you know you already have." The girl jumped up. "Grandma, it's not funny. I was just telling you that he poured me out of a puddle and then yelled at me." "Easy, Kathy. I don't believe he did it on purpose. I haven't known Mason that long, but he seemed decent to me. So, Kathy, we know how hot-tempered you are. Why don't you go to the bathroom and change out of those tattered, God-forsaken clothes and put them in the machine so you can wear normal clothes?" Granny looked reproachfully at Kathy's torn jeans. Mason tried to hide a chuckle. It was a good thing he had only brought decent clothes, in Miranda's opinion. As Kathy walked past Mason, he gave her a subtle tongue lashing that made her flare her nostrils, and then with a quick glance at Miranda, she made a fist at him. "I can see everything." The grandmother looked at Kathy over her glasses. The girl snorted angrily and disappeared into the bathroom. Mason tried to put a serious expression on his face. He didn't want Miranda to think he was as unserious as Kathy. Don't take offense to her. Kathy is very nice, except for her temper. She's like a match. She's like that about everything. You know, when she was 15 years old, she was hit by a car, and it was because a boy had a ball out of his hand. You know, an ordinary ball. It rolled on the road, and the kid cried. This crazy woman rushed after the ball, saved the ball, even gave it to the kid, and then passed out. A month in the hospital, and all because of doing first and thinking later. Mason realized that it really wasn't a very smart thing to do, but Miranda's words made him respect the girl. Apparently, the incident hadn't changed her either. Kathy remained just as fiery and impetuous or spunky. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the girl was alive, real. When she came out of the bathroom, Miranda was in the room. Kathy had already gone into the kitchen, only then seeing that Granny was gone, but she couldn't back out, and Mason realized it right away. She plopped down on the couch across from him. A minute, two. Well, now it's time. Kathy, let's make up. I'm not as bad as you think I am. Really, I didn't mean to spill it on you. I'm sorry. She looked at him in surprise, then snorted. Well, then I'm sorry too. It's my own fault. These headphones always let me down. Mason held out his little finger to her. Make up. Make up. Kathy laughed and put hers out. And don't fight again. Miranda had long since gone to bed, and Kathy and Mason were still sitting in the kitchen. So now you're going to go to all sorts of cafes and try what they're cooking. Oh yeah, that's great. What a job. Mason looked at her seriously. Kathy, why don't you help me out a little? She looked at him in surprise. How? Well, look, if I'm alone, I'll be suspected quickly. But if I have a lady with me, everyone will just think, if they notice us walking around, that I'm just trying to impress you. Do you want me to walk with you? Kathy opened her eyes wide and looked like a naive child. Exactly, but if you have that much time for me, of course. But it's expensive. You needn't worry about that at all. Think of it as the firm taking care of all the expenses. Kathy didn't resist for long. In fact, all she could manage was a moment's pause. Yes, I agree. Just a little longer, and she was sure to clap her hands. Mason smiled. And what's up with your evening gown? Excuse me. I'd like to start with a restaurant. Kathy blushed. Actually, I'm not a beggar. Of course you are. Mason looked embarrassed. That's not what I meant at all. It's just that you're young. You're hardly interested in a restaurant, and in a cafe and clothes are quite different. Why buy an evening gown if you don't need it? He got a little confused while he was explaining, but Kathy understood him. It's all right. I went to a friend's wedding not too long ago, so I had to buy one. To Mason's surprise, Kathy had excellent manners, though he chided himself for thinking that way. She wouldn't be laughing loudly or doing anything worse while in a decent restaurant. Still, he watched in amazement at her transformation at the way she deftly handled the entire set of table items. When they entered the restaurant, Mason immediately noticed the almost complete absence of guests. It was strange. Everything seemed decent, but the shortcomings began to rush in as soon as they sat down at the table. Mason noticed that the tablecloth, beautiful from afar, was covered in stains, not fresh ones of course, old laundered ones, but very much peppering its appearance. This told that things were not going well for the host. On the other hand, the host could have just been greedy or didn't know how to run a business. The waiter had to wait for more than 10 minutes, even though the room was almost empty. When they began to make an order, it turned out that more than half of the written in the menu is not there at all. Tell me, then why is it offered? The waiter, with a bored look, shrugged his shoulders. Kathy smiled. Tell us what you have so we don't waste your valuable time. The waiter perked up a little. Judging by the constantly vibrating phone in his pocket, time really was precious to him. He quickly listed the poorly chosen menu and they ordered. Yeah, it's kind of sad here. Kathy smiled again. You've never been anywhere else. Believe me, this is almost the most decent restaurant in town. When the order came, Mason realized that the cow that had made the chop had obviously died a death of its own, and with a lot of great-grandchildren. He pushed his plate away and watched Kathy eat. She noticed his gaze and said embarrassedly, I didn't have time to eat today. I came straight here after work. Where do you work? She waved her hand. Over there, we sewed tracksuits. Mason couldn't help himself and asked, Did you study neckwear? Kathy laughed. No. I always wanted to be a chef, a real one, so everyone would know me and I'd surprise everyone. But I graduated as an accountant, and now I work in a tailoring shop. That's quite a list you've got there. Why don't you work as an accountant? Did you try to get a job right after school? Nobody wants an accountant who's just out of school. Everyone wants sharks who are 90 to 60, 90, and 20 years old, with at least 20 years of experience. Mason laughed. Are you kidding? Not at all. To be honest, there's not a lot of work in this town. I've already realized that. I don't think we should torture our teeth. I think that's enough. If anyone cooks good food in this town, it's your grandmother. That's a good point. Grandma always cooked like that. I even had to move back to my parents' apartment because I'd be round in a second. You? I'll never believe it. You'll have to. I'll show you the pictures later. The same waiter came up to them, bringing a rather impressive bill. Kathy wanted to be indignant. Mason saw it in her eyes. He quickly squeezed her hand, and she quieted down. "Young man, tell me, is the host in place?" The waiter sighed, apparently thinking they were going to complain about him. "He's here. What do you want? What if I'm 5 minutes late? Do you want me to complain?" Mason smiled. "Yeah, zero discipline." "No, young man, just give him a note from me." Mason wrote a few words on a piece of paper torn from his notebook. He didn't even bother to fold it. He knew the waiter would read it. The waiter didn't bother to be ceremonious. He ran his eyes over the paper, his eyebrows raised. He nodded and disappeared. They went outside. "Shall we go for a walk?" Kathy shrugged her shoulders. "Let's. The weather's nice." They wandered so long that Mason's legs were tired, talking about nothing, but they were so interested. It turned out that Kathy lived only 3 houses down from Grandma. When they stopped in the driveway, Mason stared at the girl for a while, then abruptly pulled her to him and kissed her. Kathy didn't even try to pull away. He walked home thinking that this was the first time this had ever happened to him. He kissed a girl he was madly attracted to and didn't stay the night with her. "Mason, this is not like you at all." He said this to himself and walked into the entryway. "Hey, are you trying to buy a restaurant?" Mason bounced against the wall. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." In front of him stood a man, tattooed, and a gloomy look gave him the appearance of a jailer. "What do you want?" "I'm the boss. I want to talk to you." "You've got a lot of nerve. There's a day for that kind of talk." "Yes, but I wanted to see you." "Come tomorrow after 12 o'clock. We'll discuss it." "Okay, I'll be there." The man left the entrance, and Mason thought that it was a mistake to refuse the security that his father offered him. He'd have to call in the morning because it looked like a deal. The next day, just as Mason thought, he bought the restaurant, and he bought it much cheaper than he had expected. The owner was rubbing his hands together. "You know, I don't know anything about this. I just got out of prison, and here I am, an inheritance. I never even knew my grandfather. I was only a kid. Then we talked. Then I went to jail, and he went into business, and this happened. I've been here for a year. The restaurant's no longer profitable at all. I owe half the city. Now I'll pay up and go to the sea with a clear conscience. I've never been to the sea. I've been sitting here." Mason saw that the man was happy, as if he had made the most favorable deal of the century, but Mason himself was happy. He didn't have to sit in this town as long as he thought he would. Now it was possible not just to sit around, but to work. Work was something he really wanted to do. He already knew what he wanted to see here. By the way, the place for the base was found this morning too, and quite reasonably priced. Kathy called him in the evening. "Are we going out tonight?" "Sure, but we're not going out." "We're going." "Where to?" "You'll find out later." "In half an hour on the street, in front of your driveway." "Yes, Commander." They drove out of town. Mason was going home the next day because he had to buy equipment, and right now he had to go there. Kathy didn't know about it yet. When he stopped at a small lake that he honestly had just stumbled upon, Kathy looked at him in surprise. "Are we having a picnic? Or are we going to be shooting some kind of sample here too?" "A trial, yes. I'll treat you to my specialty kebab tonight." Kathy clapped her hands. I love kebabs. I love nature. Mason couldn't stand it, kissed her again. They sat on the shore, drinking wine, laughing. Suddenly, Kathy became serious. Mason, how are you going to drive? You've been drinking. He looked at her in surprise. I thought we were going to sleep here. You see, I have to go home tomorrow for a couple weeks, and that means I won't see you for that long. He knew perfectly well he was talking some romantic nonsense for little girls, but Kathy believed him. How are you leaving? Tears came to her eyes. Mason wiped away one tear that wanted to escape under his collar. Just like that, I bought a restaurant here, and now I have to buy everything for it. It's not like it's forever. I'm actually going to live here. Really? That's so true. Kathy reached for him, and Mason picked her up in his arms, stared into her eyes for a moment, then carried her to the car. Mason. Eh? I haven't had anyone yet. Mason shivered with heat. What a twist. He'd never had one of those either. Mason felt his mind clouded. Nothing would stop him now. During the night, they never slept a wink. When he pulled into the driveway, Kathy, she clung to him. You just get some sleep. Don't drive like that. I will. How about you? She smiled. And I've got the day off. I'm going straight to bed. Mason kissed her affectionately. Good night. More like a good morning. He slept only 2 hours. The alarm clock rang. Mason jumped up, stood under the cold shower. Miranda was gone, but there was a note in the kitchen. I'm at the market. I'll be there this afternoon. Good. He wouldn't have to face Kathy's grandmother. He took some bills out of his wallet, put them on the table, and wrote on the note, Thank you, I'm gone. Buy yourself a proper TV. Dad greeted him as if Mason had been gone for years. Son, you look different grown up. Well, Dad, I've been gone less than 2 weeks. Have you grown up in that time? Sure, I left as just a son, just Mason, and came back as a restaurant owner. Come on, everybody, you can tell me and show me. But they didn't get to talk business right away. They were intercepted by Aunt Clara, who's been your father's housekeeper for as long as Mason can remember. Where to? The child is hungry and cold from the road, and you're taking him to work. Christopher tried to be indignant, but then waved his hand. All right, feed your baby, the 2-footer. Mason missed both Aunt Clara and his father. Lisa had come over several times. Mason, who was eating Aunt Clara's specialty borscht, raised an eyebrow. What did she want? She kept asking where you'd gone, even going to your place. Mason snorted. I wonder why. Well, you better know why. There must be reasons. Mason liked Lisa. She was very pretty. She knew how to present herself, and Lisa was a good match for a businessman. A little greedy, well, there are no others nowadays. Or are there? My consciousness obligingly brought up the image of Kathy, but Mason immediately banished it. Sure, Kathy was the most beautiful thing in his life, but it was just entertainment. There was no talk of them being together. Kathy is too simple and naive, so she's going to stay at home and he's going to attend receptions and events alone. Well, of course not. A girl like Lisa, or preferably Lisa herself, should be around for these parties. It took all evening to show his father the pictures, to tell him what he wanted to do. Christopher listened attentively and twirled one picture or the other in his hands. You've done a great job, and most importantly, you bought the restaurant very profitably. Christopher looked at the map. I understand that there is nothing like it nearby. Nothing. But there are plenty of things to look at. Mason looked at the map. What do you mean? Look, there's a game room not too far away. We should do a kids' menu and advertise. We could allow banquets for the first time. After that, it's up to you, okay? Dad, you're ahead. I didn't even think of that. Of course we need a children's menu. They sat for a while and went to bed. The next day was too full of plans. Lisa caught him at lunchtime. Hi, where did you disappear to? I've been away. We're opening a branch. Oh, that's good. Why didn't you call? Maybe I could have come with you. Lisa grinned with the edge of her pouty lips. Mason smiled. Would you have gone? With you? To the ends of the earth. Would you? Sure. Well, then be ready in 2 weeks. Mason left and Lisa grabbed her phone. She had to tell all her friends that Mason had practically proposed to her. Leaving in 2 weeks didn't work, not even 3 months later. The night before he left, my dad had a stroke. He was walking to the house, came home early from work because he wasn't feeling well, and collapsed right on the walkway. Aunt Clara saw him immediately, called an ambulance, and did not touch him. Only her quick actions helped to get rid of him with little blood. Lisa had to be patient. When Christopher was fully recovered, Mason began to pack again. Lisa decided it was finally her time. She was ready before Mason was. To be honest, Lisa was boring him, but he didn't say anything. As a companion, she was perfect. While still at home, Mason found a nice cottage, which he intended to buy at once, but Lisa said nothing about it. Just before he left, he had an argument with his father. The argument was quite loud, and Lisa must have heard it, so she thought they were arguing. It's true that Lisa arrived later, or rather, she came to visit. By the way, they had a very good time then. Then she left, unable to stand the boredom Mason. It was even worth arranging this state of affairs. He got a girlfriend, beautiful, fashionable, and that's all. The rest of the time he could work quietly. But then Lisa arrived with his things. He couldn't tell her he didn't want to. She came, let her live. Lisa had instantly turned his house into some kind of brightly colored rag storehouse. For some reason, no housekeeper got along with her, so the house was a mess. Mason tried to spend as much time as possible at work, but even there she annoyed him. He had to make a condition that if Lisa showed up unannounced at his place of work, he would simply take away her money. Lisa took offense, didn't talk to him for 2 weeks, but as soon as she needed something, she found a way to make up with him. She always had the same way, which Mason, a young man full of strength, could not resist. Today was fine. Hell knows how she even found out. Although, why should she be surprised? He bought gifts for the orphanage every year. She knew that. She'd never tried to tell him what to do before, but now she was going off on him. Mason was about to leave the office when the phone rang in his pocket. Jesus, how many times can you do this? He grabbed the phone, but it was his father. Yeah, Dad. Mason, what's wrong? The young man sat back in his chair. Nothing. What makes you think something's wrong with me? Well, son, I've known you for years, so come on, tell me. Mason grinned. Dad always knew everything. Tell me, Dad, what do you do if a woman wants to marry, wants to boss you around, wants to be always and everywhere, and you don't want that? It's all right, Lisa. What did you want, son? It's your own fault. How long have you been together? Years, and you never married her. But I wasn't going to. You should have told her that, Dad. Mason, you're not 15 anymore. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Lisa's understandable. Time's running out, and you're not doing anything. Either get married or, frankly, I don't know what's going to happen. You realize there'll be a terrible scandal. I know, Dad, but now I realize I don't want to see her anymore. It's up to you. As far as I know, you don't have anyone else besides Lisa? No, I never really thought about it. You still don't want to? No, Dad. I definitely don't, and today I made sure of it. Yeah, I guess I'm not gonna have any grandchildren. Mason laughed. So you're only thinking about yourself. Not about your son, but about yourself. Well, you can take it that way. Dad, why are you calling? Not to talk about Lisa? No, of course not. Mason, you're going to the kids' birthday party tomorrow, right? Yeah. Did you forget the date? No, I just suddenly wanted to come too. Mason, you're up. You know I'd love to come. Can I ask you a question? Go ahead. Why haven't you come here once since I moved here? Is it because of Jenna? I could hear my dad sniffling on the other end of the phone. Well, you could say that. I made a big mistake once. I really liked her, and she liked me for that matter. I asked her to be my mistress. She promised me she'd have all the luxuries if she came away with me. She asked me again, mistress? And I, like a fool, confirmed it. Mason was a little taken aback by his father's confession. Are you serious? She what? She slapped me in the face and sent me away. She told me never to get in her way, and I took offense. What do you mean, I was rejected? Well, it's been years I'm old, and I can't get over her. Yes, Dad. We don't know who's more stupid. Christopher laughed. That's where you're right. So are you expecting me tomorrow? Yeah, I am. I'm gonna take care of some business today. Mason was on his way home. He was never home at this time, but tonight he wanted to finish things with Lisa. He knew there would be a lot of yelling, that Lisa wouldn't just leave, so he was even prepared to offer a payoff. The house was quiet. He was already thinking he'd come for nothing. And is Lisa hanging out with her girlfriend somewhere? But he heard her voice. She was talking in the bedroom, apparently on the phone. Mason headed that way. Kitty, why are you sulking? I can't do anything. It's just a sheep's ass, that's all. What am I supposed to tell him to marry me because I'm pregnant? What if he realizes it's not true before he puts a ring on my finger? Mason froze. Wow, she's being so frank with someone? What girlfriend? But at that moment, a man's voice was distinctly heard in the bedroom. Lisa, you've been feeding me promises for a year. Do you really think I'll keep waiting? I have enough better offers. Mason pushed the door open. Am I interrupting? Lisa squealed and pulled the blanket over herself. The man, a pumped-up, dark-haired, handsome man, began to dress quickly. Well, no, I didn't sign up for this. Do I have to? He walked quickly past Mason, who didn't even make an attempt to stop him. What's up, Lisa? It's your fault you got it. I'm not arguing. I'm just asking if you need help packing. Or can you do it yourself? And I'm not going anywhere. Then you're out in disgrace. Have you forgotten that we have cameras? And I've never watched them before, but I can now. You bitch, you bastard. Lisa was grabbing things, throwing them into suitcases. Mason was watching her with a smile. How could you think he'd put a camera in the bedroom? Lisa. 2 hours later, screaming and swearing her last words, Lisa finally got into a cab. Mason sighed. This feels so good. We should go to the orphanage, see how the preparations were going. He got into the car. It felt so good to be free. I wonder who that man was. No, not at all. Mason pulled up to the gate. It looked like the kids weren't back yet, but Jenna was definitely there. He knew she always supervised the setting up of the Christmas tree herself, then helped dress it up. He walked down the driveway, stopping to pet the big shaggy dog, which, by the way, was the dog's name. The kids found him very small under the fence, took him out, fed him, hid him from the caretakers until he couldn't fit under the beds anymore. Jenna almost had a heart attack when she saw the big guy. She immediately called the shelter, and then him. Mason arrived, and all the kids came crying to him. Uncle Mason, talk to Jenna. Tell her not to take our buddy Rex and 1,000 other nicknames. Quiet. What's the dog's name anyway? We all have different names. Right. It's just a dog. How did you manage to hide him for so long? Doesn't he bark or growl? No, he doesn't bark, never. Jenna told me right away. There, I'm telling you, he's some kind of sicko. I'll fire the whole damn lot of you. He's not sick. The younger ones were already openly sobbing, and Mason had to take the dog to the vet. The dog was healthy, well fed. But why wouldn't he bark? Because he doesn't need to bark. He's doing fine. Altogether, they persuaded Jenna not to throw out the dog, not to give it to the shelter, so it took root, though more on the street, and slept in the old lady. He was fed by everyone who couldn't be bothered. That's why he looked more like a little bear. Mason finally made it to the door. He had to tell Jenna tactfully that her father was coming tomorrow, but that it wouldn't be a surprise to her. She had a stroke a few years ago when she found out Christopher had a stroke. Almost freaked out. Mason regretted 100 times that he'd even told her. There was no one in the hallway, but there were voices coming from the auditorium. He headed that way. Jenna and her co-workers were decorating the tree. Hello, everyone. The girls said hello and continued working. Jenna gave him a startled look. Mason, weren't you supposed to be here tomorrow? Well, I decided to come today. She didn't have time to finish. Mason was attracted by the lower branches of the tree. There was definitely someone hiding there. Hey, get out! Mason squatted down and the branches of the tree slid open. A boy, about 3, maybe 4 years old, stepped boldly out of there. He looked at Mason as if he had just committed the world's worst crime, and Mason felt about that. 1,000 thoughts were running through his head. The most sensible one kept repeating itself. I don't get it. Am I dreaming? Or is this some kind of joke? The boy stopped in front of him and looked at him with a displeased look. His eyes, absolutely the same as Mason's, looked at him without blinking. Mason had no way of knowing what to say. The child was a smaller copy of Mason, and the fact that they were bound to have something in common was understandable. Just now, Mason didn't understand at all. This boy can't be related to him. Papa must know something. Though before Papa, there must be something Jenna could explain to him. There was a reason she was standing there so frightened. Mason scratched his nose with the back of his palm. For years he'd tried to eradicate the habit, but still, when he was nervous, he could rub his nose so hard that it turned red. And the boy, almost synchronously with him, reached up and scratched his nose in the same way Mason had done. The man turned to Jenna. Jenna, who is this boy? Is this your pupil the reject? She looked at him confused. Why do you ask? Jenna, since you are now trying to avoid answering, it becomes clear to me that you understand both why I am asking and what is going on and where the legs are growing from. Tell me also that you don't notice our similarities. Jenna stared at the boy, then at Mason. Do I? Can't I see it? Oh, you don't see it. Maybe it's just my eyesight. Shouldn't I call someone else to take a look? Mason didn't know why he was getting so angry. Jenna had nothing to do with it, but she probably knew where the boy was from. And if the kid really didn't have anything to do with him, the principal wouldn't be so freaked out. The boy stepped towards Mason and held out the candy. Don't yell. Mason took the candy confusedly. Thank you. I'm not screaming and I won't. He turned back to Jenna again. A stray thought flashed through his mind. Maybe Dad and Jenna. But no, they're not the same age. Jenna, Where did that boy come from? You see how much he and I look alike. It's obvious to a fool that we're not strangers, but what could connect us? Or rather, who? If the boy has been abandoned, I'll raise everyone to find out. The boy has not been abandoned, and he has nothing to do with you. Mason froze, a voice he recognized immediately. How many times he'd been tempted to call, or at least text to apologize, but then decided he hadn't promised anyone anything. On the other hand, Kathy hadn't called him once, and she could have. Now he stood there, aware of Kathy standing behind him and afraid to turn around. A puzzle instantly formed in his head. A boy who looked like him, Kathy, who he had played with and taken off. It didn't take much thinking to figure it out. The only thing I don't know is, what now? From the sound of Kathy's voice, nothing good serves him right. Mason followed the boy around him and came up to Kathy. "Mommy." Kathy scooped him up in her arms and pulled him against her. He finally met her eyes. "Hello, Kathy." "Hello, Mason." She turned and walked toward the exit, and Mason stood there like a complete idiot. What could he do? Run after her and say, "Oh, that's my son." He imagines she's gonna answer him. What a fool he is. Nearby sighed Jenna. "Come, Mason, to my room. I'll make you some tea." He obediently followed her. There was real absorbent cotton in his head. The woman made the tea, put a mug in front of him, sat down, looked at him, and started talking. "I don't even know. All this time we've all blamed you for doing that to Kathy and Kevin. And now I look at you and I realize I feel sorry for you too. His name is Kevin?" "Yes, Kathy named him after her grandfather." "Why didn't she tell me?" "I didn't know. It could have been completely different." The principal sighed. "What's that, Mason?" "Would you have married Kathy because you had a baby and you'd both be in pain for the rest of your lives, or would you have taken Kevin away from her?" "Oh, come on. That's ridiculous. Why would I take the baby away from its mother?" "Well, the thing is, Kathy came to your house. She was so desperate. Kevin was very ill at the time. Her grandmother had gone quite ill. The girl was just torn. She was so short of money. The treatment Kevin received was so much that even with our help, she would not have been able to afford it. Miranda signed over the apartment to her, told her to sell it. They just had time to sell it and move Kathy in before the grandmother was gone. Kathy was a good girl. She hung in there. Went to D.C., spent almost 6 months there, got Kevin back on his feet. Wait, she didn't come to see me. Do you really think I'd say no to help? There was a woman, a girl. Apparently she realized it all at once and told Kathy that if she ever saw her again, she would do anything to have her baby taken away from her. Lisa. Mason clutched his head. He sat like that for a while, then looked up at Jenna with completely pained eyes. What am I supposed to do now? I don't know, Mason. I'm not much of a counselor in these matters, but of course you have to do something. I can see how worried you are. Why is my son worried? His father's cheerful voice came out of nowhere. Mason raised his head, and the smile slid off Christopher's face. Son, what's wrong? Mason didn't even know how to say it. Dad, I have a son and you have a grandson. Christopher sank quietly into the chair. How's that? Jenna jumped up and held out a glass of water to Christopher. He took the glass from her hands, held her gaze a little longer than necessary. Thank you. The woman looked embarrassed and sat back down. Mason began to tell without much detail, but in a way that made it clear what a creep he was, the son of the unexpected. What do you think you're gonna do? I don't know. Dad, of course we have to do something. Only I'm afraid Kathy won't even let me on the doorstep. Christopher took a good look at him And he's right. You know, son, I didn't think I'd ever say this, but don't make my mistakes. A long time ago, I could have been happy and made another person happy, but convention rules in our lives. We have lost so many years, almost a lifetime, but now I know for sure that I am not leaving here without Jenna. And even if we don't have as much time left as we'd like, it's better than nothing. You've already deprived yourself of your son for so long, and now you have to make up for it. Don't lie to Kathy. She's been through enough because of you. You don't like her? Just say so. Don't try to marry her without love. I think if you're honest with her, she won't mind you hanging out with Kevin. Mason jumped up. Dad, you're right about everything. Thank you. He jumped out of the office. Christopher looked up at Jenna. Hello, Jenna. Hello, Christopher. All right, Jenna, whatever you want. I'm not leaving without you. It will probably be hard for you to forgive me for those stupid words, for that sentence, but I'll try. Jenna stubbornly pressed her lips together, then relaxed. Christopher, I was so sorry I turned you down then. I didn't need your money, but I needed you. It was so hard without you, I couldn't bear it. I cursed myself with the last words that I did not go with you. I would have been with you. Christopher lowered his head. I guess stupidity is our hallmark, Mason's and mine. Jenna smiled. Don't worry about it. I'm sure they'll be able to talk. And you know, I don't know about Mason, but Kathy still loves him. Why didn't Jenna say something to me? I would have solved all of Kathy and my grandson's problems. Kathy wouldn't accept your help. She's a little different. Mason raced through town. He remembered exactly where Kathy lived, but he didn't know what he would say to her. On the way, he saw a toy store and slammed on the brakes. He flew into the store in such a way that he frightened a young girl saleswoman. Girl, for a boy 3, 4 years old, what exactly are you interested in? Everything. Bring anything that's good. Mason put the car in a vacant lot, but he was in no hurry to get out. He was just afraid. After sitting for 10 minutes, he got out. He's a man, so he must be brave. Mason pressed the bell for a long time. Finally, the door opened. You? Me. He pushed Kathy aside and walked into the apartment. Kevin came out to meet him. He stared in surprise at the mountain of boxes in Mason's hands. The man knelt down in front of the boy. Hey, I brought you this. For me? Yeah, for you. The boy gingerly touched one box and then looked at Kathy. She had tears in her eyes. How much had she dreamed of seeing her son like this, next to Mason? No, not crying. Mom. Kevin looked questioningly at his mother, and she smiled and nodded. The boy sighed so happily that Mason couldn't contain his smile. 5 minutes later, they were eagerly unsealing boxes, pulling cars, robots out of there. Each new toy was accompanied by a new exclamation. Not only Kevin was squealing with joy, but Mason as well. Kathy sat down on the couch. She didn't want to smile, but looking at Mason, who was crawling on his knees and driving some tractor on the carpet, making strange noises, it was impossible not to smile. Kevin, on the other hand, had chosen the biggest car he could find and was no quieter than Mason. When they had another accident, Kathy resolutely stood up. That's it, you woeful drivers. Wash your hands and come to the table for dinner. Come on, Mom. Kevin was about to fold his lips, but Mason gave him a gentle shove. What are you doing? Everyone at every job has lunch, especially drivers. The boy looked at him in surprise. You too? Me too. In fact, if you eat it all, I'll let you drive a real car. Kevin's eyes widened as they raced to the bathtub to wash their hands. There was silence at lunch. Only Kevin talked nonstop. Mason learned that Ethan wouldn't brag about his car anymore because Kevin had better cars. Toward the end of lunch, Kevin began to peck his nose. Kathy got up, picked him up, and walked out. Mason heard Kevin muttering, "I'm not going to sleep." Kathy smiled and replied, "Well, of course you won't." About 10 minutes later, Mason cautiously made his way into the room. Kevin was sound asleep, hugging his big machine, and Kathy sat staring at one point. Finally, as if awake, she got up, walked past him into the kitchen, Mason following her. "Kathy, I don't know how to find the words. I realize they're all useless, and I'm unforgivable." Kathy was silent, and he came over. "Kathy, say something. You realize I'm not a step away from you now." She turned slowly, looked him in the eyes, was silent for a while, then said, "Are you sure you want all this?" "Of course I'm sure. I've never been so sure in my life as I am now." "Kathy, I realize that I've missed all the deadlines, that I've blown everything I can, but will you let me make it up to you?" "I'm not forbidding you. You can talk to Kevin whenever you want. That's not enough for me." She raised her eyebrows in surprise and then asked in a frightened way, "What do you want? Do you want to take him away?" "No, what do you mean?" "I want us to have a normal family. You know, a real family." Kathy moved away from him. "If it's for Kevin, then don't." "No, now, Kevin has nothing to do with it." She tried to move further away from him, but Mason pulled her against him. When he started kissing Kathy, it was somehow peaceful, somehow easy. That's what happens when you go back to a place you've wanted to go for a long time. They were interrupted by a phone call. Mason really didn't want to pull away from Kathy, but he pulled out the phone. It was Dad. "Mason, where are you?" "Dad, I'm at Kathy's with Kevin." "That's good. Is she around?" "Yeah. Put it on speaker." Mason was surprised but complied with his father's request. "Kathy, I want to apologize to you. For me and for my little brat. I'm sorry you forgive him. Don't waste time. I really want to be a grandfather." Kathy smiled faintly, and Christopher continued, "I'm calling you guys on business. Jenna and I just applied for a job. If you hurry, we'll be able to have the wedding on the same day." My father disconnected, and Kathy looked at Mason strangely. He, on the other hand, was looking at her. "Kathy, I'll tell you later all those words I should have been saying all along. I know you know how to make quick decisions. Please marry me. I'll make sure you never regret your decision. Anything to make Kevin forget forever that he ever didn't have a daddy." Kathy didn't think long. "I agree." Mason grabbed her in his arms, spun her around, and then grabbed the phone. "Daddy, please hold the place for us. Kevin will wake up and we'll be there." "I'm awake." Mason turned around, and there was a sleepy Kevin standing in the doorway, holding the same car. Mason smiled. "Dad, we'll be right there. My son woke up." It was the first time he'd ever said the words so freely, and Kevin looked at him seriously. "Are you my dad?" "Yes, Kevin. Where have you been?" Mason looked at Kathy confused, but she was already seated in front of his son. "Daddy's been working, and now he's back. Isn't he going away again?" Mason shook his head negatively. "Never." The boy thought for a moment. "Can I tell Ethan that I have a daddy too?" "Of course you can. You and I will tell Ethan together." Mason hugged his son's little body. What an unusual feeling. It makes you want to cry. The next day they were all at the orphanage. The children were still eating breakfast, and Mason, Kathy, and Christopher were arranging the presents. Mason was doing everything with one hand, and Kathy's palm was firmly clasped in his other hand. Christopher was smiling. He could see everything perfectly. Yesterday had been a wonderful day. He felt as if he had lost 20 years at once, no less. The door swung open. Christopher had barely had time to play a children's New Year's song, and the room was filled with children. They didn't rush to the tree, didn't grab the presents, just stood back and looked at everything with admiration. Kathy decided to take the lead. Then Mason joined her as well. They handed out gifts, pink bags, boxes to the girls, blue to the boys. When everyone had their presents, including Kevin, of course, Mason turned to Kathy. "I have a present for you, too." He pulled a small box out of his pocket. "Here, I'm sorry. I didn't get it yesterday because I didn't know if you'd send me away or not. I didn't think I'd be so happy today. Here, can I wear this?" Kathy held out her hand, and Mason took out a beautiful ring. Then he pressed Kathy's hand to his lips. They didn't see that Jenna and Christopher were standing nearby. They stood with their arms around each other and looked at them. "Daddy, help!" Mason looked at Kevin in surprise. He was even confused when he realized that Daddy was him. Mason smiled and sat down. "Of course, son. What's wrong? This town has never seen such a wedding in its entire existence." Of course, the wedding was at the Mason restaurant, which, by the way, has long been the most popular in town. There were so many guests that all the hotels were occupied, and the sellers of flower stores looked in horror at the empty shelves. We decided to sign in the restaurant, or rather, on the platform in front of it. At the door stood 3 men, 2 adults, and 1 small. 3 generations of men who would be happy today. All were wearing black tuxedos, including Kevin. He proudly held Daddy's hand, thought for a moment, and took Grandpa's hand too. "Dad, don't you think they should be here by now? It seems like we should have insisted that they all come together." "Yeah," Kevin said importantly. "Mom is never late." Mason smiled, and Christopher laughed. "Well, Mason, that means your Kathy will bring my Jenna on time." A white, long limousine was turning into the parking lot. Kevin gasped. "Wow, what a long car." They walked toward it. The car came to a stop. Mason opened the door and put his hand in Kathy's. She looked at it carefully and put her hand in his. Then Jenna appeared as well. Kevin gave them a serious look. "You are beautiful tonight, but I'm better." Everyone laughed, and Christopher said, "And we don't even doubt it." Kevin took Kathy and Jenna's hands and lent them to where the guests were waiting for them, where they were to become husband and wife. Weddings are fun, but the sooner it's over, the sooner he can get back to his cars.